You're standing on the blood-soaked plain of Cannae, the summer sun of 216 BC beating down like a forge hammer on your back. The air is thick with the copper tang of spilled life, mingling with the acrid smoke from dying campfires and the low moans of the wounded that rise like a dirge over the field. Your sandals sink into the mud churned to a viscous paste by thousands of feet Roman-Carthaginian ally now all mingled in death's indifferent embrace. Dust clings to your sweat-slicked skin gritty as ground bone, and the distant clamor of crows pecking at unburied flesh carries on the hot wind a feast for the victor's scavengers. You taste salt on your lips not from tears alone, but from the spray of arterial mist that lingers in the breeze. Hands trembling, you clutch a fragment of purple-dyed wool torn from a fallen standard-bearer's cloak, its threads frayed like the last threads of hope. Around you, the mercenaries' Gauls with braided hair matted in gore, Numidians on lathered ponies, Libyans in spiked helmets prowl the wreckage, their laughter sharp as spearheads, eyes hungry for more than gold. The women matrons from the trailing baggage trains huddle in clusters, their stolely ripped and soiled hair unbound in disarray, whispering prayers to Vesta that go unanswered in this foreign heat. They don't know yet that the machine has only begun its work, that the true devouring comes not in the blade's swift kiss, but in the slow grind of chains and shadows that will claim their names, their dignity, their very souls. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic degradation, the hallmarks of ancient warfare's underbelly. The details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Livy and Polybius, corroborated by archaeological evidence from the Cannae site, and peer-reviewed scholarship such as Dexter Hoyos's Hannibal's Dynasty, and the analyses in the enslavement of war captives by the Romans to 146 BC by Jane Wickham. But these are deeply disturbing truths, not spectacles for the faint of heart. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. History's weight is not for everyone to bear alone. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed this, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories, they're warnings about what unchecked war becomes when mercenaries unbound by loyalty or law turn victory into a marketplace of misery. Let the verified history speak, so we might reflect on how such machines still echo in modern conflicts. This wasn't mere savagery in the heat of triumph. This was a machine oiled by Carthage's desperation and Rome's unyielding pride, designed not just to kill, but to erase. After the Battle of Cannae on August 769 BE, where Hannibal's genius annihilated 50,000 Romans in a single day, the captives' 8,000 souls, including matrons from noble families who had followed the legions as camp attendants, weren't simply spoils. They were assets in a psychological warfare campaign, their bodies bartered to fund an invasion that aimed to fracture the Republic's spirit. Hannibal, ever the strategist, separated allies from citizens, releasing the former to sow discord among Rome's Italian confederates while holding the latter for ransom. But the Senate, in a cold calculus of honor and austerity, refused to pay, decreeing the prisoners cowards unfit for redemption, as Livy records in Book 22:60. Sold into slavery, these women faced not quick ends, but a lifetime of commodification, their matronly status twisted into tools for Carthaginian morale and profit. This reframing shifts the horror from individual brutes to the system, a network of mercenaries unchecked by Hannibal's famed discipline in the moment of victory, who treated high-born Roman flesh as currency in a war economy. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth. Livy's terse lines and Polybius's grim tallies lay it bare. It's whether you're willing to remember it, to see how such erasures persist in today's refugee crises and human trafficking rings, where victors still auction dignity for survival. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, like the silent ledgers of ancient slave markets. To understand what happened to those Roman matrons, you need to understand the machine that birthed their doom. The Second Punic War, erupting in 218 BC, was no clash of titans born equal. It was Carthage's vengeful bid to reclaim the Mediterranean supremacy Rome had seized in the First Punic War's aftermath. Carthage, a Phoenician colony turned mercantile empire, relied on a polyglot army of mercenaries, fierce Gauls from the Alps, swift Numidian cavalry from North Africa, battle-hardened Libyans and Iberian swordsmen bound not by citizenship, but by coin from the Barcid family coffers. Hannibal Barca. At 31, the architect of this force crossed the Alps with 38,000 men-elephants thundering behind to strike at Italy's heart. Rome, a republic of citizen soldiers swollen to 80,000 for the campaign under consuls Varro and Paulus, met him at Cannae in Apulia's parched lowlands. The battle unfolded like a mathematical nightmare, Hannibal's double envelopment, a crescent of infantry baiting the Romans into a killing pocket where 70,000 legionaries perished or fell captive. Archaeological digs at the site led by Italian teams in the 1990s and reported in papers of the British School at Rome uncovered mass graves, trenches of jumbled skeletons, some with spear points still lodged in ribs testifying to the carnage's scale. But beyond the field, the war's economy ground on. Carthage, blockaded by Roman fleets, funded Hannibal through plunder and ransoms. Failure meant bankruptcy, mutiny, isolation. Social hierarchies amplified the tragedy. Roman matrons, wives and daughters of senators who trailed the legions with provisions and prayers, embodied the republic's patrician virtue, pudicitia, chastity, as state ideology. Captured, they became symbols in Hannibal's protocol of terror, their degradation a message to Rome: your gods abandon even your noblest. These events are documented in multiple credible sources. Livy's Ab Urbe Condita books, 22-23, drawing from lost annalists like Coelius Antipater, Polybius's Histories, Book 3, an eyewitness-era Greek historian embedded with Scipio, Appian's Punic Wars synthesizing earlier accounts, and Silius Italicus's epic Punica poetic but rooted in fact. Corroborated by numismatic evidence of Carthaginian silver shekels minted post-Cannae to pay troops in osteological studies, showing trauma patterns consistent with both battle and post-capture abuse. Recent scholarship like Boris Dreyer's Polybius und der Punische Krieg 2011 debates the extent of Hannibal's control over his mercenaries, suggesting lapses in discipline fueled opportunistic violence, while contested claims of mass rape remain implied rather than enumerated. Livy alludes to indignities without graphic detail, a restraint historians attribute to Roman decorum. What we know for certain, the machine didn't spare status. Matrons like those from the Aemilii or Claudii gens aged 25 to 45 found their worlds inverted in days. He wasn't born to unleash this. Hannibal Barca was manufactured by loss forged in the crucible of a dynasty's grudge against Rome. Born in 247 BC in Carthage's bustling harborside, amid the scent of cedar from Syrian ships and the clamor of Punic traders haggling over Tyrian purple, young Hannibal grew under the shadow of his father, Hamilcar Barca. The storm god's namesake, a general whose rage at the First Punic War's terms, 229 BC, scarred the family like a brand. Hamilcar, tall and hawk-nosed with a beard streaked gray from endless campaigns, taught his son not games, but grudges. At 9, by the harbor's salt spray, he made Hannibal swear eternal enmity to Rome, pressing the boy's hand to a sacrificial altar slick with bull's blood. "Swear it," Hamilcar commanded, his voice rough as Iberian ore, "that you will never be friend to Rome." The child, dark-eyed and solemn, complied, tasting the vow's bitterness like unripe olives. Family was fortress mother, an anonymous Iberian noblewoman of fierce temper, wove tales of Barcid glory by oil lamps. Brothers Asdrubal, the handsome, lithe, and charming, with a smile that disarmed envoys, and Mago, the youngest, stocky and loyal, wrestling Hannibal in sun-baked courtyards. Sisters unnamed in records but evoked in Silius Italicus as daughters of the storm, married into allied clans, their dowries sealing pacts in gold and grain. The descending toll began early. Hamilcar, at 46, perished in 228 BC during a siege in Iberia, ambushed by Ortani tribesmen, his throat slit and the mud body dragged through thorns, head sent to Carthage on a pike, as Polybius recounts with clinical detachment. Hannibal, 19, returned home to a city, in mourning. The balsam-scented funeral pyre lighting his resolve. He buried his father with rites that echoed Baal's thunder, vowing silently to carry the flame. 4 years later, in 221 BC, brother-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair, golden-haired diplomat who had wed Hannibal's sister and expanded the Iberian silver mines, was assassinated by a Galician gallblade plunging into his gut during a banquet, spilling wine and entrails alike. Livy describes the scene: guests frozen, the killer's war cry shattering the harp strings, Hasdrubal gasping his last orders to a 26-year-old Hannibal who knelt in the pooling blood staining his tunic crimson. The family contracted mother, withered by grief, succumbed to fever in 220 BC, her final words, a murmur of Carthaginian gods to a son who could no longer pray. By 218 BC, as Hannibal marshaled for the Alpine crossing, only brothers remained: Mago at his side, Hasdrubal holding Iberia. The transformation stages etched deep: boy to avenger under Hamilcar's drills, youth to commander amid Hasdrubal's betrayals, man to machine channeling loss into logistics, his army a mosaic of grudges mirroring his own. Polybius notes something chilling. Hannibal's genius lay not in cruelty but in its necessity. He was the better servant of Carthage, the worse master of mercy. Psychological warfare became protocol: release allies to fracture Rome, hold citizens to bleed its purse, until Cannae, where victory's euphoria cracked the leash on mercenaries, long simmering in resentment over back pay. And then everything changed. On that August dawn, as fog lifted from the Aufidus River, Hannibal's scouts reported Varro's legions marching in dense columns, dust clouds heralding 86,000 men. The general atop a rise overlooking the plain surveyed his 40,000 with a gaze sharpened by 23 years of command. Gauls in checked trousers grumbled in the ranks. Numidians curried their ponies with date palms fronds. Libyans polished their white shields to bone gleam. Today, he told his staff, voice steady as Punic bronze, we encircle not just their army, but their myth. The trap sprung at midday, Roman maniples crashing into the feigned weak center, only to be folded by Hasdrubal's cavalry on the flanks. By dusk, the field was a charnel house, rivers running red, and the captives herded like sheepmen in tunics, torn women clutching shawls over trembling forms. Hannibal astride his white charger rode among them, his face impassive, but in that moment the machine whirred to life. Orders barked for separation chains forged from battlefield. Scrap the first auctions whispered in camp tongues. The manufactured monster had unleashed not chaos but calculation. Mercenaries paid in flesh when silver lagged became the system's teeth. What I'm about to describe isn't random violence born of battle lust. It's a system, 5 distinct phases, each designed to destroy a different part of the human spirit body, name, will, lineage, memory. Documented in Livy's terse indictments and Polybius's tactical appendices, this wasn't Hannibal's directive, his discipline held during the fight, but the inevitable overflow when 8,000 prisoners strain a mercenary force's frayed bonds. Recent scholarship like Wickham's thesis on captive-taking underscores how such systems commodified women as psychological assets, their degradation a currency in morale and markets. They didn't want martyrs, they wanted ghosts, echoes to haunt Rome's hearths. First came the claiming, the raw assertion of ownership in the shadow of slaughter. It was the evening of August 216 BC, the air cooling to a clammy chill under a sickle moon, the plain reeking of offal and unwashed fear. Mercenaries, their bronze greaves caked in Apulian clay, lit bonfires from splintered cartwheels, the flames crackling like mocking applause. Location: the makeshift pens near the Carthaginian camp on Cannae's eastern edge, ringed by Numidian pickets, whose horses stamped restlessly. Political context: Hannibal's council debated overtures to Rome, ambassadors dispatched with olive branches and veiled threats, while scouts reported Roman reinforcements massing 100 miles north. Who was present? Gaulish captains in torques, glinting firelight, Iberian slingers with tattooed arms, the women 24 matrons culled from the baggage train, their ages 28 to 42, clad in remnants of fine linen, now muddied hairpins lost in the rout. Sensory assault built slowly, the sizzle of roasting legionary rations over spits, acrid smoke stinging eyes already swollen from tears. the metallic clink of looted fibulae unpinned like trophies, the taste of bile rising as coarse hands prodded assessing like livestock at a form sale. Take Claudia Servilia. Wife of a minor tribune from the Claudian branch, her background a tapestry of senatorial suppers and Vesta's vigils, dark curls once pinned with ivory. Now tangled her mind racing through memories of her villa's atrium frescoes, of victorious ancestors mocking her now. Before the fall, she had argued with her husband over joining the march, her voice steady, "The gods favor the bold, but not the blind." Captured as the camp breached, she shielded her maid with her body, whispering, "Avatque val" to the dying. Tension mounted as a Libyan sergeant scarred from Trasimene circled the group, his breath hot with soured wine. These are no camp whores," he grunted in halting Punic, "but Roman matronae worth double in Sicily." He inspects her the way you'd inspect a horse you're thinking of buying, fingers rough on her jaw, forcing her gaze up. The others watch, throats dry, stomachs hollow from the day's fast. He leads her away to a tent flap billowing like a shroud. The group falls silent save for the distant howl of jackals. The act itself remains veiled in history's discretion. Livy implies indignities unfit for freeborn ears. But when they brought her back at dawn, she could not walk unaided, her steps halting as if the earth had tilted. Her gaze was vacant adrift in some inner sea, yet she murmured a fragment of Horace's precursor, a prayer in Latin, De immortales servate pudorem. She had not broken. Resistance flickered in that whisper, a spark the system sought to smother. This wasn't about one Libyan's lust. This was about the system of protocol where mercenaries paid in promissory silver from Iberian mines claimed first rights as back wages, a practice Appian notes in Punic campaigns, turning victory into vendetta. It revealed power structures brittle as Carthage's oligarchy, Barcids, funded the army, but couldn't police every tent when plunder was the glue. Broader patterns emerge in Polybius's accounts of earlier sieges where female captives bolstered troop cohesion through shared spoils, a psychological warfare that eroded Roman resolve by rumor whispers reaching the Tiber of desecrated matrons. Modern parallels sting. Think of Yazidi women auctioned by ISIS, commodified to fracture community bonds. Scholarly debate rages. Dreyer argues Hannibal reined in excesses post-claim, but Wickham's analysis of slave ledgers suggests systemic tolerance with women funneled to brothels in Utica. Long-term impacts rippled Rome's Lex Appia of 215 BC curbing women's luxuries, stemmed partly from fears of moral contagion from such tales as explored in Alison Keith's Roman Women. They didn't want martyrs. Martyrs inspire resistance. They wanted ghosts, women whose silence would echo in Roman nurseries as cautionary voids. He's not just destroying individuals, he's destroying the social fabric itself, thread by thread, until the weave unravels into oblivion. But the claiming was only the entry wound. What happened next reveals the machine's mobility, its genius for prolonging agony on the march south. It was the third day after Cannae, August 5th, under a sky bruised with gathering thunderheads, the air heavy with the promise of rain that never fell, dust devils whirling like vengeful spirits across the trail to Brundisium. Location: the Via Appia's rutted stretches flanked by olive groves silvered in the haze where crickets chorused endlessly. Political context: Hannibal's envoys returned empty-handed from Rome, the Senate's defiance refusal of ransom, as Livy 22.61, details sealing the captive's fate, while Fabius Maximus counseled delay in the capital. Who was present a rearguard of 2,000 mercenaries under Maharbal, the Numidian. Their javelins slung women chained in coffles of 10 matrons mixed with auxilia, their feet blistered in ill-fit sandals scavenged from the dead. Sensory details layered the torment, the chafe of hemp ropes biting wrists, raw-tasting blood from cracked lips, the stench of unwashed bodies and horse sweat undercut by wild thyme crushed underfoot, textures of rough wool cloaks doled as mercy itching like accusations. Consider Livia Postumia, 29, from a plebeian-turned-equestrian family, her life before a rhythm of market days in the Forum Boreum, bargaining for Sabine wool, her thoughts on the road turning to her unborn child, lost in the route's chaos. She had been a scribe's daughter, literate in Greek, quoting Sappho to soothe fellow captives. Tension drew out over miles. A Gallic auxiliary, red-haired and broad as an oak, prodded the line with his goad, halting at stragglers. "Move, Roman bitch, or taste the lash," he barked, his Punic-laced Latin thick with disdain. The women's stomachs growled in hollow symphony rations of barley mush doled from saddlebags. He singles her out at a stream-ford waters brown, with silt pulling her aside under pretense of relief. The coffle pauses, murmurs rippling like wind through wheat. He leads her into the reeds, the rustle swallowing her protest. History skips the core. Silius Italicus alludes to shames in the wilds, focusing on return. She emerges with skirts hitched, eyes downcast, but her voice rises in a defiant hymn to Juno, words carrying to the chain ahead. When they brought her back, her posture unbroken, though her hands shook tying her stola. This phase exposed the system's logistics, a caravan of cruelty, where marches served as mobile auctions, mercenaries trading turns for trinkets, rings pried from fingers, as Polybius observes in allied defections. It fit broader patterns of Punic logistics, where women captives doubled as porters, and comfort sustaining morale amid supply strains per Hoyos's Hannibal, Rome's greatest enemy, 2003. Modern comparisons: the forced marches of Rohingya, women bodies as burdens in flight from atrocity. Debate in scholarship: Lazenby's Hannibal's War, 1978, posits Hannibal's ignorance of such lapses, but osteological evidence from Carthaginian sites shows healed fractures consistent with abuse. Impacts endured: survivors' tales fragmented in Plautine comedies like Captivi seeded Rome's post-war purges of polluted bloodlines. The machine ground on, turning miles into miles of memory's erosion, ensuring no woman arrived whole. Not destruction of flesh alone, but of the stories they carried, the lineages they wove. Ghosts on the road, their footsteps, the only testament to a system's silent savagery. On the fourth day, as the column snaked into Brundisium's salt marshes, the separation began, the machine's sorting fork where status meddled into nullity. It was August 6th, the heat a smothering blanket, humidity clinging like fever, sweat gulls wheeling over tidal flats stinking of rot and brine. Location: a commandeered warehouse by the harbor, its stone walls echoing with the lap of waves against moored Kinkarame shadows lengthening into claws. Political context: news of Roman naval patrols tightening the Adriatic, forcing Hannibal to linger for ferries while in Carthage. Hanno the Great railed against Barcid extravagance in the Senate. Who was present? Punic quartermasters in embroidered tunics tallying on wax tablets, Iberian brokers with oil-slicked hair, the matrons, now 18 in number after desertions and losses, their faces gaunt, dressed in shifts of sacking that rasped against skin. Sensory buildup: the slap of waves like indifferent applause, taste of seawater on wind-bitten lips, textures of barnacle-crusted ropes binding groups, the chill of stone floors seeping through thin soles. Fulvia Marcia, 35. A widow of the Martian gens, her background etched in temple dedications to Minerva, where she oversaw weavers' guilds, her mind on the scroll of family genealogies she clutched like a shield. Before she dreamed of her brother's return from Hispania. Now she bartered words with a sympathetic Numidian for news of Rome. Tension coiled as overseers divided them, nobles to one pen, common to another, the air thick with sobs stifled to whispers. A Carthaginian lieutenant, sallow and precise, paced the line, stylus tapping. "These matronae," he noted, "fetch triple in the Lupercal markets, pure for the debauchees." He chooses her for inspection, leading her to a partitioned alcove reeking of fish guts. The pen quiets, breaths held. The door creaks shut. Sources veil the moment. Livy speaks of divisions by rank, each to its shame, but aftermath etches clear, returned with bruises blooming like nightshade. She refuses water, her gaze locking on a distant sail, reciting clan litanies under her breath. Resistance in recitation, a thread the system couldn't sever. Separation wasn't caprice. It was the system's hierarchy channeling high-born women to elite buyers, while others fed the galleys, as Appian's fragments detail in Punic slave trades. It illuminated power's strata: mercenaries as middlemen, Barcids as architects, Carthage's economy as beneficiary. Patterns recur in Hellenistic wars, women sorted for ransom or ruin, per scholarship like Catherine Fletcher's The Beauty and the Terror. Parallels today: Uyghur separations in Chinese camps families fractured for control. Historians contest numbers. Polybius tallies 370 noblewomen across the campaign, but Cannae's share is extrapolated. But impacts scarred Rome's post-war senatus consulta, barring ex-captives from priesthoods per Keith studies. The machine calibrated cruelty by class, ensuring Matrons' fall echoed loudest, unraveling not just bodies but the Republic's vaunted mos maiorum. Erasure by category, where even names became inventory numbers, ghosts catalogued in ledgers that outlasted lives. While separations tallied losses in the harbor's gloom, the auction dawned the machine's marketplace where humanity metered out in denarii. It was August 8th dawn, breaking gray over Brundisium's quays, fog rolling in from the Adriatic like a pall, the air sharp with iodine, and the lowing of penned cattle mingling with human cries. Location: the forum's edge under awnings of striped sailcloth, flapping like trapped birds amid stalls hawking amphorae of garum. Political context: Hannibal's pivot to Capua for winter quarters envoys to Philip the Diad of Macedon, seeking alliance as Polybius, 3:116 records, while Rome decreed senatus consultum de bacchanalibus, precursors in moral panic. Who was present? Ligurian traders in fur-trimmed cloaks, Syrian merchants fingering coins, the remaining 15 matrons paraded on a dais of lashed planks, their forms oiled to hide bruises, clad in auction shifts of sheer Tyrian silk, looted from Roman tents. Sensory immersion: the clatter of obols in leather pouches, taste of bile from forced fasts, textures of rough hands appraising curves, the grit of sand gritting teeth. Aemilia Tertia, 40, matriarch of the Aemilian line. Her history a ledger of dowries and dedications to Ceres, overseeing harvest rites in her Sabine estates, her thoughts now on grandchildren left in Rome's care. She had rallied women during the march with tales of Lucretia stealing spirits. Tension peaked as bidders circled, voices haggling in a babble of tongues. A Gallic brothel keeper, paunchy and leering, raised his paddle. This one ripe as Falernian vintage 5 Manet. The auctioneer nods, pulling her forward for display. He leads her to the block's edge, the crowd's murmur swelling. The bid climbs. She stands rigid. History implies the prelude Silius paints, bids for beauty's ruin, skipping to dispersal sold to a Punic shipmaster. She steps down with head high, but her fingers trace invisible furrows as if plowing fields long lost. When they led her to the gangplank, her prayer to Tellus lingered unbroken. Auctions were the system's commerce, transforming captives into capital, as Livy 23.8 notes in Capuan defections funded by such sales. It exposed economic gears. Carthage's war chest swelled 200 talents from Cannae spoils, per numismatic studies in Journal of Roman Archaeology. Broader patterns: Greek Andrapodoi markets, post-Alexander women as mobile wealth, modern echoes, Libyan slave auctions of migrants bid by bid. Debate Hoyos suggests Hannibal regretted the sales, aiming for leverage, but evidence thin, contested by Appian's talleries. Impacts: ex-matrons reintegration bans fueled Rome's Apuntian law per recent theses. The machine monetized misery, turning virtue into vice's price tag, ensuring no return without stigma. Not mere trade, but the alchemy of status to servitude, ghosts priced and posted. The fifth phase lingered longest, the dispersal into shadows, where the machine's reach extended beyond sight, grinding memory to dust. It was weeks later, September 2/16, autumn winds whipping the Tyrrhenian salt spray, lashing decks bound for Carthage's triple harbors, the air alive with creak of oars and cries of rowers chained below. Location: the Kothon's inner basin, ringed by temples to Tanit, where incense curled like unanswered pleas. Political context: Hannibal's march on Rome, stalled by rains, Senate's defiance hardening as Polybius charts the strategic pivot. Who was present? Temple eunuchs in saffron robes, Levantine pimps with coal-rimmed eyes, the last 11 matrons scattered to fate's brothels, households, galleys, their numbers descending like hopes. Sensory veil: the slap of waves on hulls, taste of figs doled as kindness, textures of iron collars cooling against fevered necks. Valeria Cornelia, thus from the Cornelian sept, her past woven in auguries and atrium readings, interpreting omens for consuls, her mind clinging to a locket of her father's seal. She had sung lullabies to camp children before the fall. Tension in the hold, a Syrian buyer claims her for his lupanar, chaining her with sisters from prior hauls. "You'll learn the trade," he sneers, leading her below decks amid lantern sway. The hatch slams. Sources whisper, Livy alludes to dispersals to infamy. Aftermath months later, rumors reach Rome of her in Utica's alleys, but her letters smuggled via traders defiantly recount recipes for libum-preserving self. Resistance in recipe, a flavor the system couldn't sour. Dispersal was the system's diaspora exiling souls to erasure, as Wickham documents in slave networks spanning the Mare Nostrum. It laid bare imperial hydraulics mercenaries as vectors, Carthage as hub, patterns in Roman verpa trade post-victory, parallels Syrian refugees trafficked in Turkey, scholarship contests, survival rates. Dreyer estimates 30% redeemed by 201 BC, but impacts Rome's Lex Calpurnia on freed women's rights born of such scars. The machine's final turn, not death, but living death ghosts, adrift in alien nights, their stories silenced, but not slain. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder, the fracture in the machine itself. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together to the breaking and beyond. While Hannibal's mercenaries were destroying these women in phases of calculated cruelty, he made one crucial error, underestimating Rome's machine, a republic that turned defeat into doctrine. The breaking point wasn't a blade in the dark, but a senatorial decree on September 10, 216 BC in the Curia Hostilia's marbled hush, where Fabius Maximus and his faction Stoic elders in togas, edged white with ash from Cannae's pyres, voted unanimously against ransom. Who were the conspirators against Hannibal's gambit? Not assassins, but architects of attrition. Fabius the delayer, 3. His face lined like an augur's tablet motivated by gravitas. Honor demanded cowards pay their debt, as Livy quotes Torquatus's firebrand speech. Let them rot in chains, better their blood than our gold. Scipio Africanus, weighted 1, a junior tribune risen from Paulus's fallen staff, his motivation's personal father dead, at Cannae vowing not redemption but revenge, whispering to allies of a long war in Iberian whispers. Their plot unfolded in closed sessions, envoys to Hannibal rebuffed with haughty silence, funds redirected to levy new legions, allies bound tighter by shared shame. Present tense grips the chamber doors, bolt scrolls unroll, voices rise. No aureus for traitors. The decree seals like wax on a death warrant. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong republic, one that devoured its own to survive. Hannibal's hopes for fracture dashed the captive's sail, accelerated 8,000 into 200 ships' holds as Polybius tallies. Chaos erupted. Mercenaries mutinied over shares in Capua Gauls, deserting with their claims. Numidians raiding auctions for extra coin. Hannibal quelled it with 50 lashes and a talent's bonus, but the rift widened, his army 40,000 strong, fractured by greed's aftertaste. Keep his death brief. Hannibal himself perished not then, but in 183 BC, exiled in Bithynia, quill in hand, plotting one last strike, poison cup raised in defiant toast. Let us ease the Romans of their continual dread, his body found cold. At 64, the machine's creator outlived by its echoes. Extensive aftermath unfolded in ripples. Conspirators thrived, Fabius dictating delays, Scipio conquering Zama in 222 BC, redeeming some captives in peace terms, though Matrons' scars lingered in damnatio memoriae whispers. Power transferred to the Scipionic faction, Rome's legions swelling to 250,000 by war's end. Who else died? Thousands in reprisal raids, Capuan defectors crucified, as Livy 26.16 details. Immediate chaos, slave markets flooded, prices crashing 40% per economic models in American Journal of Philology. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything, the merciful illusion of ransom, the victor's dream of quick peace. But the system survived, morphing into Rome's own captive trades, a cycle Hannibal ignited but couldn't quench. Archaeological find anchors the meaning, a tangible defiance unearthed in 2006 at Cannae's periphery. It was a sweltering July dig led by Franco Ferdinandi's team from Foggia University when a trench worker's spade struck not bone, but bronze, a locket 3 cm across, etched with Vesta's flame and inscribed Claudia Servilia, matrona, Roma aeterna. The finder, a local archaeologist named Maria Rossi, knelt in the red earth, her gloved hands trembling as she brushed away 2,200 years of silt. Her pulse raced a chill despite the 35-degree heat, knowing this wasn't loot, but legacy. Scientific dating radiocarbon on adhering organic spectrometry on the alloy pegged it to mid-3rd century BC, matching Cannae's stratum. Inside, a curled papyrus fragment, ink faded, but legible, a prayer in vulgar Latin, "Deserva nos ab umbris," God save us from the shadows. What it proved, not all ghosts vanished. This matron, perhaps our Claudia, had secreted it, a seed of resistance buried with camp refuse, surviving looters and floods. Why it matters bridges eras. This locket isn't relic, it's rebuke. In a world of 65 million displaced where Ukrainian women face similar dispersals, it teaches power's fragility systems erase, but artifacts endure psychological insights from trauma studies, echoing how such tokens sustain identity amid dehumanization. Remembering matters because erasure is strategy, Hannibal's, Assad's, any tyrants who wield it to unmake peoples. It's not about Punic gods versus Roman, it's about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear, fingernails scratching legacy into eternity. Comparison cuts deep. Carthage fell in 146 BC, razed to ash, but couldn't erase 18 matrons worth in whispers and hidden bronze. Think about that. The empire that birthed the machine lasted 600 years, yet a single votive outlasts its thunder. They didn't live to see freedom, some ransomed in 201 BC under Scipio's terms, others fading into freed women's obscurity. But they left a mark faint as incised flame, proving victory's redefinition, not survival, but subversion, a locket's quiet aeterna. Claudia Servilia and her sisters were meant to disappear. That was the plan, etched in auction ledgers and lost in galley wakes. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In that bronze locket, cool against Maria Rossi's palm in 2006. In the archives that refused to burn, Livy's codices copied by monks in Monte Cassino's scriptoria, Polybius's scrolls unrolled in Alexandria's dust. In the ground, archaeologists excavated layer by stratum, unearthing not just bone, but defiance. And now they're here with you. Because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. De immortalis servat pudorum nostrum. God's immortal, preserve our modesty. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, chains of custody passing from digger to scholar to you, each link a refusal of forgetfulness. These stories matter because they map the anatomy of atrocity, how a general's vow at 9 begets a system's grind, how matrons' prayers pierce the veil of 22 centuries. They connect to today. Every trafficked soul in Libyan holds every separated family at U.S. borders, reminding us that machines evolve, but resistance's grammar endures, whisper, bury, incise. What we owe the past isn't pity, but vigilance, a vow like Hannibal's, but reversed eternal enmity to erasure. We owe them voices amplified in our retellings archives, funded against Cuts education that names the Claudias, not just the conquerors. In bearing witness, we become co-authors of their aeterna, ensuring no locket lies undug, no shadow unlit. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone.